Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Ask the ARC. I'm Carly Shortino-Poulter, and I'm the director of the ARC Advocacy Network here at the ARC of Indiana. And I'm also a fellow parent. I have a 25-year-old son with autism who's on the family supports waiver. And quite frankly, I live this life too. And I know that it can be confusing. And I know that at times it can be really overwhelming. And especially right now, because we have had so many changes and so many changes in such a short amount of time, it can be really hard to keep up with what the rules are right now. And so that's what kind of prompted tonight's Ask the ARC. Between that and the fact that we are getting a lot of phone calls from families and from individuals who are just flat out confused and who are calling because they just want to make sure that they are getting the services and the supports they need. And they're hearing so many things, they don't know which way to turn. And one of the things we need to understand right now is that not only is there some misinformation out there, right now, especially, there is a lot of outdated information out there because we've had so many changes in such a short amount of time. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about maximizing waiver services so that people can get the supports and the services that they need. So I do want to let you know that we are recording tonight's session. So keep that in mind as you do ask your questions. I'm going to ask that you put questions in the Q&A. I will periodically stop to answer those questions. And that's the really big thing I want to do tonight because there's so much confusion, because there are so many questions. I want to make sure you have a place where you can ask those questions and get some answers. So let's go ahead and get started tonight. All right. So, so when it comes to finding the right services and supports, there are a few things we need to think about. We need to think about Medicaid health coverage. We need to think about waivers. We want to think about mental health services. We want to talk about VR services, believe it or not, and then community supports that may be out there to help us out. And then we're going to talk about how all of these things work together. So let's start with Medicaid. And I know that sometimes we merge all of these things together. We think of it all as Medicaid or we think of it all as waivers, but they're actually very separate programs that wind up being intertwined. And so when we're talking about Medicaid here, we're specifically talking about Medicaid health coverage. And sometimes people will call that Medicaid state plan. And there are a lot of different services available through that Medicaid state plan. And not only are there a lot of services, things like going to the doctors, things like seeing specialists, tests that can be run, evaluations that can be done, but there are a lot of other things too. And one of the things I want to encourage you to do is to also look at the different the different manuals that are actually out there. Because here's the thing, there are actually manuals for some of the different services that can be out there. And those manuals can be a treasure trove of information. So what you're seeing right now is you're seeing the website where you can find these manuals. And by the way, you can get to this site from the ARC of Indiana's website. If you go to our waiver changes page, we've put the link on there. But as you can see, and we're going to talk about this here in a little bit, there's an entire manual on prior authorization and how you request prior authorization, what information you need to get those prior authorizations approved. Then, and these are definitely written for providers, so don't get me wrong, you know, they are kind of their own language. But one of the things I want you to see is how many different manuals we have. We have manuals specifically for chiropractic services, specifically for dental services, or durable and home medical equipment and supplies. That's a really important one that people often need. Evaluation and management services, genetic testing, hearing services, home health services. We're definitely going to get into that a little bit. Hospice services, and so much more. So I want you to know that this is out here because you can look at any of these at any time and see, for example, what the regulations on home health services are so that you can see how they determine how much support someone can qualify for. You can see what are the covered services, what are the non-covered services. Um, Here they talk about how somebody qualifies for home health services. Here down here, they're going to talk about how you qualify for different amounts of hours. So, up to 12 or 16 hours a day, those are the regulations you've got to meet. Up to 8 hours a day, here are the different things that they're looking for. From 3 to 7 hours a day, these are the things they're looking for. So those waiver or those Medicaid manuals actually have a lot of really good and important information that can make a huge difference in whether or not you get those services and in whether or not those services are actually available to you. So what kind of prompted the idea for this particular webinar was I got an email from a woman who's on the health and wellness waiver, and she was asking a bunch of questions. She was asking, can I get PA? Can I also get HHA? Will this affect my attendant care hours? And there was just so much confusion wrapped into one email. That's why I decided we needed to do this, because everybody's hearing a lot of different things and they're hearing a whole bunch of acronyms, and we never bother to explain what the acronym stands for. And that's part of what's leading to the confusion. So, what is PA? Well, PA literally stands for prior authorization. And that's getting approval to have a certain service or have certain uh, things put in, getting approval to have those in advance. And prior authorization is actually really, really common in health insurance in general. So whether it's private health insurance, whether it's Medicare, whether it's Medicaid, there are actually a lot of things that require prior authorization. Therapies require prior authorization. So whether that's occupational, physical, speech therapy, whether that's ABA therapy, they often require prior authorization. Getting equipment requires prior authorization. So that can be anything from a wheelchair to equipment after you've had knee surgery that will help in your rehabilitation. Those things need to have prior authorization. Some tests, like a psychological evaluation, some medications require prior authorization. Surgeries require prior authorization, and home health services require prior authorization. Oftentimes, when in our world, when we hear the term PA, people are using that term to specifically talk about prior authorization for home health services. But that's not exclusively what PA stands for. And oftentimes when you are submitting those prior authorizations, especially if it's going to be for ongoing services like therapies, like medications, things along those lines, um, that prior authorization is often going to involve creating a 6-month plan for those services. And then at the end of those 6 months, you can submit a new plan with updated information, especially when it comes to therapies or to home health services. They will authorize those oftentimes for 6 months at a time, unless there's a reason you need less. And then at the end of that 6 months, they'll want to see what progress has been made. What are the new goals we're going to work toward? And to get updated information, in part to make sure that these services you're getting are actually effective. And like I said, oftentimes in our world, when people are talking about Medicaid PA, they're often talking about home health services. And this can be an option when there is no caregiver or when the primary caregiver is unavailable. And what home health services will do is it will provide either a home health aide or a nurse to provide care, again, when there is no caregiver or when the primary caregiver is unavailable. The amount of service you get depends on the individual's needs and their circumstances. Somebody may need an actual registered nurse, someone else may only need a home health aide. Someone may only need help for a couple of hours a day. Someone may need help throughout the entire day while their primary caregiver is working, for example. And one of the things we've seen over the last year is number one, we've seen that the state is now often requiring home health services before certain waiver services can be used. But we're also seeing where people who have had established home health services for a long time are suddenly having their hours cut. And one of the biggest reasons for that is that a lot of times the documentation that is being submitted in that request, in that prior authorization request, just isn't enough information. We've got to get a lot more detailed in what this service is going to do, why you need this service, and why you need this amount of service in order to maintain your health and safety. Now, there have also been some recent changes with home health services. In December of 2025, the state actually updated that home health manual. And in that update, they basically said that an individual could not be paid both for home health services and for waiver services. The issue with that section was that it was very vague in how it was written. And so there were a lot of different ways that people could interpret that section. And so it led to a lot of confusion and a lot of questions. And so in March of 2026, the state rescinded that entire section to remove the idea that somebody could no longer be paid for both home health services and waiver services. But I do want to warn you, even though the state rescinded it, one of the reasons they rescinded it is because they are actually working on a rewrite to make it more specific, to make it easier to understand. In all fairness, I think the state had one specific thing in mind and didn't realize that the way they wrote it could be read in a lot of different ways. So they are actively rewriting that section now. What it's going to look like for sure, I don't know yet. But I do want people to know that they are rewriting it so that they can be paying attention and be looking for that rewrite when it comes out. So I want to go ahead and stop here to see if we have any questions specifically about the Medicaid part of this. Again, go ahead and put those questions in the Q&A so that when it comes to the healthcare side of this, you can ask those questions and you can get those answers. I don't have any questions quite yet. So I tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and continue on, but at the same time, feel free to put your questions in there. You guys, if you have been on our webinars before, you know that I will absolutely answer the questions as they come in. And I try to get to all of the questions. I may tell you to hold on just a minute because we'll get there and you're getting ahead of me. But I definitely want to answer your questions. So now let's move on to waivers. And again, I think a lot of times when we think of waivers, we think waivers and Medicaid and and sometimes even MRO services, we think of them all as one thing. They're not. They're actually very separate programs who have their own sets of rules and regulations, but they are just they rely on one another at the same time. And so when we're talking about Medicaid waivers, there are a lot of different services available for each waiver. I think the thing is people often only use the services that they've heard of, and they haven't heard of very many services. So when you're thinking about what services you want and what services you need, instead of thinking about the service, think about what support you're needing. What is it that you want to accomplish? And also think about the why. Why do you need that support? Why do you need that service? Because sometimes there can be several different services that can help somebody achieve their goal. And so I think we're so often used to, being given a list of different options, and we think, oh, we'll choose one from column A and two from column B. Instead of starting with the services and figuring out and choosing services to fit around our lives, start with our lives. What are the things we need? What are the things we want? And then which services can actually provide those supports. So one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to break this down for every single waiver so that you can see what services are actually available for each of those waivers. These are all of the services that will be available on the health and wellness waiver beginning August 1st. There are 21 different services available through this waiver. Most people only think of attendant care and respite. They might think of home and community-based assist or home and community assistance. They might think about assisted living, and now they can also think about structured family caregiving, but oftentimes that's the only things they've heard of. That's all they think about with the health and wellness waiver. But as you can see, there are 21 different services available just on the health and wellness waiver. The TBI waiver actually has 24 different services available through it. And again, most people don't realize all the services that are there. This is the family supports waiver. It's got 25 different services. Again, people think of PAC and respite, and they think of music therapy and rec therapy, and they think behavior support services. But oftentimes those are the main things that they think of. But as you can see here, we've got a ton of different services that are available, but we don't hear about them. And so we don't know that they're available for us to use. And sometimes we may be thinking of one thing, we may be trying to get PAC services and that can be really difficult to find, but maybe rehabilitation might be a way to achieve what you want. Maybe rec therapy might be a way to achieve what you want. There can be a lot of different ways to get there. CIH waiver has 30 different services, literally, that are available through that CIH waiver. And if you're wondering, hey, what's the difference? Well, for example, the difference between the CIH waiver and the family support waiver, well, first of all, we have the CIH waiver has residential services. They've also got rent and food for unrelated live-in caregivers. They've got community transition. So if somebody is leaving a nursing facility, for example, and they're going to leave that nursing facility and move back into the community and have that CIH waiver, well, they didn't really have anything in the nursing homes, so they need some stuff. They need to be able to buy a bed. They need to be able to buy a dresser, and so that community transition service is there to help pay for some of those basic things to move out of an institutional setting and back into the community. But I did this in large part so that people would actually be able to see there's a lot more through the waiver than people realize. So, what services should you use? Well, again, you need to look at what you need and what you want to achieve first. And so here I'm going to stop again for a second because there is also a waiver manual. And that waiver manual is a treasure trove of information. And so I want to share it with you. And again, we've got this link on our website. This is what it's going to look like when you first go to the waiver manual. And I'm going to be honest, it is totally written for providers. It looks like English. It's not, it's bureaucracy, which is its own little sub-dialect. But here's what I want you to see. There's a lot of information, like what's expected from providers. How somebody applies for these waivers. Objective-based allocation for the CIH waiver. That's how they decide what your budget is for services. How are they going to monitor those waivers? What are your appeal processes when it comes to a waiver? How do they ensure quality? How do you file it? What is an incident report and how do you file one? What is a complaint? How do you do that? But then here's the really great information. So here we have every single service that's available in this particular case on the family support and CIH waivers. And here's the thing. I just clicked on it and it took me to that section. The very first thing you have is the list of all the services. Here You have the codes they use. So, for example, because people tend to speak in alphabet soup instead of words, one of those acronyms your case manager or your service providers may be throwing around is DHI. What in the world is DHI? Well, DHI is Day Habilitation Individual. But then look here, it also tells you how much that service costs. So, for example, day habilitation individual costs $36.88 per hour. For those of you who are on the family support waiver and have a much lower waiver budget, knowing those costs make a big difference. But then look here too. We've got day habilitation individual at $36.88 an hour, but here we've got small group day habilitation. Um, and that is only going to cost your budget $13.28 per hour. Right there, you get almost 3 times the amount of services for the same price. So that's another way to be able to maximize that waiver is by knowing how much a service costs so that you can figure out how to maximize that waiver budget you have. I'm scrolling down here because I want you to see something else. So in this waiver manual, it also has a description of every single service. So first we've got that service definition. Then we have what are the reimbursable activities? What are the things they're allowed to do on this particular service? What are the documentation standards? And what are the limitations? And what are the activities not allowed? That is an incredibly important thing to pay attention to, because one of the things we've had go on here in the last couple of years is that sometimes there were some providers who were billing for services that weren't actually allowed. And so now we've had some consequences, whether that's limiting certain services, whether it's reducing the number of services that relatives or legal guardians can be paid for. Part of that is because we've got to pay attention to that activities not allowed section. For example, here's behavior support services for the family support and CIH waivers. We've got that reimbursable activities section. We've got the service standards. We've got the documentation standards because they do have to document all of these things. And then the activities that are not allowed. So, for example, with behavior support services, you cannot use restrictive techniques. You cannot provide these services in an educational setting. Or as any part of an individual's school day. That's specifically not allowed. So those are the kinds of things that are available through that waiver manual. And I was showing you the parts for the family support and the CIH waivers, but a little further down is where you will see that same type of information for the health and wellness and the TBI waivers. And so I see we do have a couple of questions. I do want to go ahead and get back to, because there were just a couple more slides that I wanted to share, and then I will take your questions. Oops. So look at that waiver manual. See the list, the details of all of the services, and that's also where you can find a lot of those acronyms. So if you're confused about what PA is, or you're confused about what HHA is, okay, that's a bad example because neither of those acronyms are in there. But let's say you hear DHI, RHS, BSS, those types of acronyms are actually in there because what those acronyms are, those are the actual billing abbreviations. And so that's why providers tend to use those because that's what they're putting in their bills, and that's the abbreviation that they are using. But I also want to encourage you to maximize the services that are available to you. Like we just showed, group services can be a great way to be able to extend services and to get more services, because when you do it in a small group, it is cheaper than doing it one-on-one. And so as a result, your budget goes further and you can use more hours of services if you do it in a group setting. And sometimes, frankly, that's more fun. When you're doing, when you're going out into the community, have a guys' night out. That can be small group day habilitation. Rec therapy or music therapy can absolutely be a lot more fun when you're doing it in a small group. There are times where one-on-one is more appropriate, but consider group therapies as a way, or group services as a way to do things to help extend that budget and be able to get more services and supports for the same amount of money. And then I'm also going to encourage you to use what I call twofers, two services for the price of one. So we have a lot of people who are looking for respite because they desperately need the break. And I can understand that. But I also recognize it is really hard to find respite providers just because of the staffing shortage. Well, if instead of using respite, you are using day habilitation with your your loved one's going out and doing things and learning new skills and working on all sorts of different things, and you are still getting your break at the same time. So it's kind of like getting two services for the price of one. Your loved one is getting the supports they need, and you are getting your break at the same time. I also think it's important that we stop and we think about what are our needs versus our wants. Needs are those essential skills and services that your loved one must have. Maybe that's medical equipment. Maybe that's after school care. Maybe that's mental and or behavioral health help. And I just realized I misspelled behavioral because I'm bad about that. Um, those are things that a lot of individuals must have. Then we have our wants, the things that just make life better. Maybe that's working on social skills. Maybe that's going into the community. Maybe that's, going to the Y and working out. Maybe that's career exploration. So because you want to work and you're starting that journey, and part of that journey is figuring out what else out there so that I can figure out what I'm interested in, so that I'm not just getting a job, but I'm actually looking at a career. Think about those needs versus those wants. And it starts by working with your case manager. A good case manager will help you navigate all of this. A good case manager will not rely on self-advocates or families to know everything. They're not going to rely on you to know exactly which services you want and all of that. And I think that's one of the problems we have, is that when somebody says, "Oh, I want respite," or "Oh, I want PAC," what happens, the case manager is just, is following what it is you want. But if we say, okay, what I want is I want my son to be able to go out and be with other kids and make friends. I will never forget when my son started waiver services. We had a great case manager, and she asked me, "What is it that you want out of this waiver?" And I said, "I wanted to learn social skills." And she looked at me. Part of it was we had been friends for years. Our kids were mothers of preschoolers together. She looked at me and she goes, "No, you wanted to have friends." And I stopped and I kind of melted. I'm like, "Yeah, that's exactly what I want." She's like, "Okay, here are some services that can help work on those things. Here are some ways we can accomplish that." And that's what a good case manager will do. They'll get to your why. Why are you wanting this? What exactly is your goal, so that we can figure out what services are out there to make that happen. So they'll help you find the right services. They'll think outside of the box. So it's beyond PAC and respite, and we're getting into the heart of what it is we want. They'll identify different ways to get what it is you need, and they'll help you find resources beyond just waiver services. And I want to point out, right now, a lot of people have to choose a new case management company because starting August 1st, we're only going to have 5 case management companies. So this is a great time to look for a good case manager. And even if your case management company was chosen to continue, you are still allowed to change if you want to, because you can change case managers or case management companies at any time. So I want to stop because I know that we got a few questions in here. Um, so I recently had an issue with a provider sending in a motion to dismiss my appeal for skilled nursing, saying that it wasn't submitted on time, but it was actually submitted a week early. Yeah, that is a totally separate thing. And you're right. A big part of that is, first of all, we have to keep records. It I know that it is frustrating that we have so much paperwork to do. That paperwork is also what saves our lives. And so that is something you can absolutely fight, and you can absolutely fight it by showing the proof of, nope, here's the receipt, here's the proof of when I submitted this. This was a timely appeal, and therefore the appeal must go on. So absolutely kind of makes me mad, to be perfectly honest with you. Um, let's see. So what if you have kids? Can they get the same services also? They absolutely can. Those services are available for everyone. And sometimes, we have some services that whose names are a little bit misleading. Adult day services. Okay, yes, it is mostly for adults. Does that mean that children can't access it? They can. They've just got to do it in certain different ways. And sometimes there might be some licensing issues involved there. But especially during the summer, yeah, that can be something that can be accessed. You've got to find the provider who's willing to do it. But yes, that can be appropriate. And part of it is we've also got to find the right environment, because no, we don't want an 8-year-old doing day services with mostly 80-year-olds. That's just not going to work for anybody. We've got to make sure it's a good fit first and foremost. But generally speaking, all of those services are available to all ages. I keep bringing up day habilitation because frankly, it's one of the broadest services out there. We used to have two different services. There was one called community habilitation, and sometimes people just called it CHIO, which was the abbreviation for community habilitation individual. And then we had facility based habilitation. And the biggest difference was that community habilitation had to be done in the community. Facility based communication was done like at the provider's office. Okay. And what they did during the pandemic was they actually merged the two services together, and that created a lot more flexibility, so that if, for example, doing small group community habilitation, the group was going to go out and they were going to play basketball in the park, and then suddenly the heavens opened, you could easily now go back to the agency's offices and have a movie night instead. So that created a lot more flexibility. But day have does not just have to be done during the day. You can do it in the evenings. You can do it on weekends. So sometimes the service names are a little bit misleading too. Um, what do you do when you are a client with both medical needs and also a severe intellectual disability? It seems like the category that has to choose, but they have both needs. Oh my gosh, my dear, I swear I did not put her up to this question, because that's actually one of the things they are considering right now. So one of the things that's happening, and this wasn't something I was intentionally going to talk about tonight, but I'm glad you're asking this question, because you're right, that's an absolute problem. If you've got somebody with an intellectual disability, but they've also got those medical needs, they're still one person. They should not have to choose between the two. And right now, that's exactly what has to happen. Well, one of the things that they are considering with waiver reset, and again, this is just what is being considered. Nothing is set in stone, but this is one of the issues they're looking at. And so they are considering the idea of maybe merging all of the waivers together, so that somebody doesn't have to choose between getting their developmental needs met and getting their physical health needs met. So I think that there are some good opportunities on the horizon. We're looking at late 2027, maybe even early 2028. But I think that's absolutely one of the things that is definitely on the horizon, I will say. Ladies and gentlemen, please continue to put your questions in the Q&A as we continue. And now let's talk about some of the other services that are also available, because we often, we think about waiver services. We may not think of anything else. Or we may think of waiver services and remember, oh yeah, we've got the Medicaid health coverage too, but we've got some other services available to us. And especially, we have mental health services available to us. And that is another way to help maximize the services that are available to get your needs met so that you are not having to choose. And so you are able to get, or you are more likely to get the supports and the services you need. And so when it comes to mental health care services, there are some special services available exclusively for children. And the first one is school-based counseling. This is not available in every school, but there are a lot of schools who do offer this now. And it's when a school contracts with a community mental health center to provide mental health services actually at school where the kids are during the day, so that they may leave to go meet with their counselor to work on different things, and especially to work on some of them in the school setting, which is where they spend a third of their time. But you're not having to actually go to school, pull them out of school, go to, a therapist's office, and then bring them back to school. This is a way to do that with a lot less time spent out of class, but also in that child's natural environment, which for a third of their day is school. Now, sometimes you have to have Medicaid health coverage in order to use school-based services because school pays for it by billing Medicaid. But it's something to talk with your school district about to find out, hey, do you have this option? What do we need to do to access this option? And it's a good way to start having those conversations to figure out if this is available to you. And then another mental health service that can be available specifically to children is something that is commonly called wraparound. And technically, there are two different programs that are sister programs. There's the Children's Mental Health Wraparound Program, which technically is a home and community-based service. So it's technically a Medicaid waiver through the Division of Mental Health and Addiction, but it's not like our waivers because this is designed to just last a year. And then there's the Community Mental Health the Children's Mental Health Initiative, or CMHI. And one of the biggest differences between the two is that for children with intellectual or developmental disabilities, they have to go through CMHI because the way that wraparound waiver is written, children with intellectual and developmental disabilities can't use that, but they can use CMHI. And because it is written up that way, they can have CMHI services and the beads waiver services at the same time. That's why it's important. Is that way you are getting additional supports and services and making sure that you can extend those services to get additional supports. But what CMHI does is it provides what's called a WRAP facilitator, kind of like a case manager. And they provide an array of mental and behavioral health supports. That can absolutely be a therapist and medication management if they don't already have that. That can also be skill building. That can be family support and training. So somebody, and it's typically a peer support for the family, for the parents, to be able to work with other parents who have been there and done that and survived it all, to help them navigate this process, because the wraparound program is for children with serious emotional disturbance or really serious mental health needs. And so being able to talk to someone who's been there and done that, and you guys all know that makes a huge difference, because when you live it, you understand it in a completely different way. CMHI can also provide respite services. They can also provide habilitation services. But then there are some mental health services that are just available to everyone. And one of those is Medicaid Rehabilitation Option, or MRO services. These are through community mental health centers. And yes, it can provide therapy and medication management, but it can also provide additional services like skills training and development, like child and adolescent intensive resiliency services, psycho social rehabilitation, commonly called Clubhouse, which is essentially a day program more for people with mental health needs, and case management through MRO as well. And one of the things we can do is we can blend all of these services together. And there are some RAP facilitators and some case managers who are better at blending these services together than others. But you can have multiple services and be in multiple programs at the same time. One of the issues is that services cannot duplicate. Okay, so you can't be doing the exact same thing or working on the exact same skills, but you can complement one another. So, for example, let's say you're getting behavior support services through the waiver and you're working on managing frustration in the home or in the community. And then that school-based therapy is working on managing frustration in the school setting. They're not exactly the same because you're working on them in different settings, and the focus is on different settings because, school expectations and community expectations are different things, but we're blending those together so that we're still working on frustration. We've got two different people working on how to deal with frustration, but in different environments. And so that way we're getting more and additional services and supports to help the individual learn the skills they need to manage that frustration. Let's say we've got somebody who's working with vocational rehabilitation services, and they're working on discovery, which is learning what types of jobs are out there to figure out what somebody wants to do, what they like, what they enjoy, so that they can figure out, what kind of work they want. Well, they can do that with VR, and then maybe with the waiver supporting them, they can do some of those things in a volunteer setting. So, for example, with VR, they can't really work on volunteer work because VR is about paid employment. So we can do discovery work with VR. Maybe we've got somebody who really loves animals, and so VR is helping them, learn what all is involved with working with animals. And then on the waiver side, they're getting support in volunteering at their local humane society. Or maybe, we've got somebody who loves working with kids, or loves baking or something along those lines. They're in VR, they're working on the discovery on the employment side of this. And then on the waiver side, we're doing that volunteer setting so that we're exposing them even more to it, getting them used to those things. So that way we are extending services that way. So services can't duplicate, but they can complement, they can blend, they can extend. Um, then there are some community services that are also available to us. And one of the biggest ones that I think of and that I know is a desperate need, but many people don't realize that there are some supports there, is in transportation. I talk to a lot of people like there's no public transportation in our community. And I mean, I recognize that for decades, Indiana's economy was based on the auto industry. So, yeah, we don't have a lot of public transportation in Indiana, but we may have more than you think because there are a lot of counties who do have transportation, but it's typically marketed toward and identified as senior transportation. But it's not just open to seniors or older adults, it's also open to people with disabilities. So, and a lot of counties have that. Now, don't get me wrong, some counties have really limited hours, some only work Monday through Friday. There is a cost to this, but it's normally decently affordable. It varies. I've seen anywhere from $3 per ride to $6 per ride, but they normally are within that range. But for example, I'm going to use Central Indiana as the example here. I live in Hamilton County, and we have Hamilton County Express. Well, Hamilton County Express is technically open to everybody. A lot of people just haven't heard of it, and it is door-to-door bus transportation. So my son arranges for his own rides. They pick him up at our house and they take him directly to work. That is something that he can do. Um, in Hendricks County, you have Link Hendricks County. In Johnson County, you have Access Johnson County. But then here in Indianapolis, you have Open Door. And Open Door is specifically only for people with disabilities and older adults. It's not open to the community because Indianapolis also has the Indigo bus service. And so that is the public transportation open to everyone. A lot of communities have this. It's just that a lot of people don't realize it. So one of the things I would recommend is, Googling senior transportation and your county name, because that is the way that it is going to come up in a search far more often. Then the other thing is, yeah, let's talk about carpools. I may be channeling grade school a little bit here, but carpooling with other people, whether it's other people in your day program, other people in Special Olympics with you, other people at work. Carpools work for a reason, and that's something to consider just to be able to get the things you need during the day. Then we've got our parks and our libraries and our YMCAs and sometimes even our hospitals. They do classes on a ton of different topics, and this is a great way to learn new skills. The parks and the libraries often have programming, especially throughout the entire summer. They tend to have more programming even then. The YMCA year round. And believe it or not, hospitals even have some interesting things. There are some hospitals who will have classes on healthy eating, and as a result, they have actual cooking classes. And sometimes those cooking classes can be hands-on cooking classes. So if one of the things your loved one wants to do is learn how to cook, or they need to learn how to, safely, be in the kitchen, check out your local hospital to find out, hey, do you have any education programs? Talk to your local YMCA, your local library, your local parks to find out what they have. Oftentimes, they are offered at no or a low cost. So a lot of different things that we often overlook, but can actually be a really great option. Some after school programs, game stores will oftentimes have game nights. That's a great way to work on social skills for somebody who needs that help. And they're doing it using something that they really enjoy doing. But I also want to encourage you to look beyond disability specific options, because I think one of the traps we accidentally fall into is we are looking for disability specific things. Well, if your loved one loves to cook, or if your loved one loves crafting or knitting, or whatever the case may be, that's not disability specific. There are a lot of people who like those things. And so, if your loved one loves to knit or to crochet, find the group in your community who's knitting baby blankets or little hats for babies in the NICU or just for newborns in general. Find somebody find that group who is knitting or crocheting blankets for people in hospice or for veterans. Or maybe they're doing it for the local Red Cross or Salvation Army or whatever emergency services organization is around. So, like when somebody has a house fire, we've got a warm blanket to wrap around them, or we've got a teddy bear to give them, even if it's a knit teddy bear. You know, those things don't have to be disability specific, and yet it's a great way to make sure that we are expanding our loved ones' social networks. We're getting them more involved in the community. So we're helping them learn how to be around other people. But more importantly, we're making sure other people learn how to be around our loved ones. Recognize that our loved ones may have disabilities, but guess what? They're just people. They like the same things we do. People with disabilities like ice cream just like anybody else likes ice cream, whatever the case may be. But while it's not a service in the traditional sense, we're absolutely working on social skills when we're going to the game store for their weekly game night. We're absolutely working on social skills and responsibility when when we're doing the knitting the baby blankets. We're absolutely learning life skills when we're taking those cooking classes, whether it's through the hospital or the Y or the park or the library. Those have value. And even though they're not paid services or services in the way we think of them, they're absolutely a way that our loved ones can learn skills, can have more social involvement, can create a broader network of support and a broader community, and still reap benefits from all of that. So let me stop here because I know we've got another question. Um, I know services can't bill at the same time. How do providers make sure that this isn't happening? So if we're talking services within one program, like just services within the waiver, they know that because they can't be there at the exact same time, and so that's how we do that. But if we're talking about like when we're trying to blend services like through MRO and through a waiver, one of the big things that's important in making and in doing that and in appropriately blending those services together is we have team meetings together. We make sure that the waiver providers are at the MRO team meetings. We make sure that the MRO providers are at the waiver team meetings. Or if somebody's involved with the Children's Mental Health Initiative, we make sure that those waiver providers are part of the CMHI team. We make sure that CMHI team is going to those waiver quarterly meetings. So it's really essential to have that open communication so that we make sure we are blending and not duplicating services, whether that's making sure we're not billing at the same time, which I think that part's a little bit easier because, you are literally supposed to be reporting what time and day you are doing those things. So that is less of my concern, although I know that sometimes there are people who bill inappropriately. It's more to me about, the documentation on what you are doing and making sure we're not duplicating that. And that is where a communication is essential to that. So including each other in each other's team meetings, making sure everybody has each other's email, making sure that you have signed off on whatever releases of information you need to make sure that there can be open communication is really, really important there. And just really focusing on that communication piece, getting everybody on the same page so that they are working in tandem to provide services that complement but don't duplicate. It is incredibly important. So, ladies and gentlemen, please go ahead and continue to put your questions in the Q&A, and let's continue on because here's the next part, which is how how does this all work together? Because therein is the other part that confuses people. And so how all of this works, well, start with services through your Medicaid health coverage. And a lot of times that's where you need to start anyway, because a lot of the other services like waiver services, like some of the VR services, like especially if VR is going to buy equipment for a long time, you know what? I have missed I missed a whole slide. I apologize because I knew I wanted to talk about VR. So I want to step back and talk about VR really quickly because VR can also be a way that you can extend services and supports and maximize the services that you're getting. So vocational rehabilitation services is its own state agency with a different funding stream. It is part of the Division of Disability, Aging, and Rehabilitative Services. So it is a sister agency to the Bureau of Disability Services or BEADS. People will call vocational rehabilitation services either VR or Voc Rehab for short. But it is its own state agency and it has its own funding stream. So the things you do through VR do not come out of your waiver budget. And that's one of the important things to know. The focus, though, is on employment. Okay, that is their purpose, is to help people engage in competitive um, community-based employment, meaning making sure people are earning at least minimum wage, that they are fully integrated into the community and working. But not only does it mean actually helping them work, that can also include training. And so they've got a couple of different programs. One is pre-employment transition services, or pre-ETS. This is specifically for 14 to 24-year-olds. So when they're talking about that transition piece of that, what they mean is that transition to adulthood. So pre-ETS is done oftentimes in cooperation with schools, but it is not a school-based program. And the reason that's important, you don't have to get it in the IEP. You don't have to get the school to agree to it. It is a separate program. It's just done in cooperation with schools. But the purpose of pre-eds is working on a lot of those foundational job skills. So there's a lot of discovery to help expose people to the different types of jobs that are out there. It's more than just work in fast food or custodial work. There are a lot of different jobs out there, and a lot of different jobs that people with disabilities can absolutely do. They can also work on self-advocacy skills. That is really, really important. Um, they can um, they can do some post-secondary counseling. So once high school is over, what's our plan? What are our options? Things along those lines. And then we have the more traditional VR services. Yes, that can mean providing a job coach and helping somebody actually get a job, and, help them write their resume, help them seek that job, help them with the interview process. Then once they get that job, help them get settled into it until they're doing it enough on their own that they're stable. But that can also include training. So yes, that can actually mean college. Yes, that can mean a trade school. Um, um, but VR can also help provide a variety of services and equipment if it is necessary for employment. So, like for years, VR was the only program that would help pay for a hearing aid, because Medicaid health coverage wouldn't do it. Whether waivers could do it or not was a little iffy. VR was the one who was often providing hearing aids for people. Um, they can also do vehicle modifications if somebody needs that for their employment. So if part of this is making sure that they can get to and from work, and they need to modify a van to accommodate their wheelchair, or they need a oh, I'm drawing a total blank on the word. I can see it in my head, but that doesn't help you. Um, a way to transport that wheelchair or that scooter. If somebody is using a scooter to get around, VR can actually do those sorts of things. I know somebody who needed to have a vehicle modified to make the hand controls easier, and to make the brakes and the accelerators up near the steering wheel, because they weren't able to use their feet for those sorts of things. VR is able to do a lot of different things. If somebody is going to college, VR can hire note takers. VR can provide equipment that might make certain things easier. So way back in the day, before computers already had accessibility features built into them, they would buy equipment that would read a textbook aloud to somebody if that's what they needed. There are a lot of different things that VR can do, but the requirement is it has to be necessary for employment, whether that's getting the job or maintaining the job. VR can do a lot of different things. Now there is a little more overlap between VR services and waiver services. We've added a few more waiver services that are employment focused. So whether that's benefits counseling, whether that's extended employment services, whether that's workplace assistance, those three things, and career exploration and planning, those four things are now waiver services. A lot of those things can also be done with VR. And so use VR when you can, because those VR services are not coming out of your waiver budget, and it makes those waiver dollars go farther. And I'm so sorry that I missed that slide earlier. It was one that I really wanted to talk about because it's not one that a lot of people think about. So let's talk about how all of this works. Like I said, start with the Medicaid health coverage first, because a lot of times you're required to go through Medicaid first. Even if they know it's going to get denied, it's that they need that denial letter so that they can move on. So, for example, let's say somebody needs equipment. Let's say they need a new wheelchair, and maybe VR is looking at paying for the wheelchair because you need that to be able to work. You might be able to stay in some of the day, but you wouldn't be able to work for a significant amount of time because you don't have the mobility to do that, or you don't have the stamina to do that. So maybe VR is looking at helping you get a wheelchair so that you are able to work. Well, the first thing they have to do, though, is they have to submit that request to Medicaid first. Um, and sometimes Medicaid will absolutely pay for it. Or maybe Medicaid will pay for a part of it, and then VR can come in and pay for the remainder. Um, Maybe we've got some other equipment, like let's say, for example, um, you want to get a weighted vest for your loved one. You've tried them, they make a big difference, and so you want to get a weighted vest. Well, that can be through specialized medical equipment and supplies through the waiver. But first, you have to submit the request to Medicaid health coverage, and you have to get the Medicaid health coverage denial before the waiver will pay for it. So sometimes we've got some regulations like that and some processes like that. A good case manager will walk you through all of that. You also then go through Medicaid health coverage first, then look for other programs that could provide appropriate services and supports like VR, like MRO services, like the Children's Mental Health Initiative, like other community supports that might be out there. Then determine what your waiver can provide. By doing all of those things, you're making your waiver budget extend because you're getting some of your needs met in other ways. So it's not coming out of your waiver budget, because using a mix of services will help extend services and supports and help those waiver budgets go even further. So at this point, I know we've had a few questions come in. And so I want to get to these. By all means, please continue to ask your questions, especially if you've got questions, when it comes to the alphabet soup of the world we live in. Go ahead and ask ask those questions, because this is really your chance, because I know that there are a lot of questions out there. So let's get into them. We never in 26 years had a team meeting. Do they really happen? Oh my goodness. Yes, they're required to happen every quarter. Um, Wow. Um, yes is the quick answer. I so yes, you should absolutely be meeting with your case manager, and you're supposed to have your service providers all at those quarterly meetings as well. Um, I know that doesn't always happen. They're supposed to be there because, in part, those team meetings are there to discuss, okay, what are the things that are going really well? What are the things we still need? What are the things maybe we need to adjust? Because maybe we've been working toward learning how to do laundry, and now they know how to do laundry. So we don't have to work on that skill anymore. We don't have to have a goal for that because they've accomplished it. So now let's move to the next part. Maybe the ultimate goal is that somebody wants to be able to move out on their own. Well, we need to break that down into manageable steps so that they learn those skills. And that's what the team meetings are really about, is to discuss what are the things that are going well, to help identify what are the things we still need to do. What are some of the barriers we're coming across, so that then we can work together to devise ways to overcome those barriers, or to seek new opportunities to help the person accomplish the goal they want. But yeah, you should be meeting every single quarter. So every 3 months with your case manager and the rest of your support team. I was trying to quickly scan the list come August 1st to the waivers in particular. Oh, are they going to have family and caregiver training available? Um, you know what? As you say that, that was not on the list. Hold on, I'm looking at the list myself right now. Uh, yes, sorry. You panicked me there for a minute. Yes, the good news is family and caregiver training is absolutely still going to be a service available under the Family Supports Waiver and the CIH waiver. See, even with me, sometimes somebody will ask the question in just the right way, and my mind blanks out, and I've got to look it up. And that's also why those waiver manuals and those Medicaid provider manuals can be really, really helpful. I kid you not, when the state puts out the waiver amendments, as they have been doing this, we have always saved copies of those so that I can go back and look things up as we go along. But yes, family and caregiver training will still be available through the Family Supports Waiver. What is extended services? Okay, here's my gripe with extended services. That is the most generic sounding thing in the title in the universe. Nobody has any idea based on that title what extended services is. It should be called extended employment services. So basically, when somebody works with voc rehab, um, you know, they're working with a job coach until the person gets settled in their job. And then VR will close their case because they're successfully settled. But sometimes we have people who still need that job coach to come in every couple of weeks, once a month, whatever, to make sure things are still going well. So that if they need a little bit of extra support, if they need, somebody to help, smooth over some things that are going on, that's what extended services is for, is so that when their VR case gets closed, but they might still need a little bit of extra support or somebody to kind of check in on them. That's what extended services is available for. Um, what happens when our son moves out? Well, there can be a lot of things that can happen there. Um, Part of it kind of depends on what types of services and supports he has. So we do have some people who are on the family supports waiver, but who are living independently. Now, part of that is because these are individuals who have more skills. But they've also been surrounded with some supports that can help them, whether that's paid supports, like having waiver services come in a few times a week, whether that's making sure that we've got home health coming in and maybe helping them set up their medications and things like that. Or maybe that's, again, some of those outside of the box ideas, like having a personal assistant like Alexa or Google Home or something like that to be able to support them. Maybe that's using a video doorbell to help kind of monitor some things. Maybe that's sharing certain apps with the family so that we're all kind of on the same page, so that you can make that joint grocery list through Alexa. Sorry if I just set off anybody's system there, or maybe that's maybe having a joint calendar or Life 360 or something like that. So when it comes to somebody being able to move out, um, part of it is making sure that they've got the skills they need and making sure that we're setting up, especially some technology to help them, whether that's auto bill pay, auto prescription refill, things like that. And then working out a system of how often are we going to stay in touch? Um, at one point, I think a lot of you know, at one point, my son went to the Erskine Green Training Institute. And as a parent, was it nerve-wracking? Of course it was. First of all, he's my oldest son. And so my baby was moving away, and there was absolutely that part of me who was like that. And I was trying to be brave, and it was only 10 weeks. So it wasn't going to be lasting forever. But one of the things when my son did go to EGTI, I wasn't seeing him daily, and I knew not to go up too often or anything like that. But one of the things we set up was that we were going to have video calls. I teased him. I'm like, I want proof of life. I need to actually see you, not just hear your voice on a phone call. And so, and so I said, so do you want to have a video call every day? Do you want to have it every other day? Notice by asking that, I just set the parameters of what I was comfortable with. I did not leave that up to him. He got to choose whether he wanted it every day or every other day. And he chose every other day. But it was just a quick little, 10-15 minute call so that I could make sure he was okay. Was it for him? No, it was totally for me. But making sure that you're having that regular contact, that 5, 10, 15 minute video call, every couple of days. Maybe eventually you get to once or twice a week or once a week, things like that, so that you set eyes on them, so that you can see what's going on, and things like that. That's one way to help make that work a little bit better. And I will also say that on our YouTube channel, and by the way, this will be posted on our YouTube channel, we do have a webinar on working toward independence and kind of breaking that down about what that's going to look like, and how we make sure our loved ones are able to have the skills and the supports they need to be able to live on their own. Um, I've heard from several families who must change case management companies. Um, I'm being told that they're not getting back to these families. I tell them to call the CEO. Part of that is right now they've got several thousand families who are all reaching out to them. And right now we also have the in-person and the virtual case management meet and greets going on. So there are still 3 more in-person meet and greets coming. Next week, we have Richmond and Terre Haute. One is on Tuesday, one is on Thursday. I can't remember which is which. And then on the week after that, we have Fort Wayne. Those are the 3 that are still there. And a big part of it is that they're being flooded with calls. And part of it is also that really it was June 1st when they were supposed to, when all this was opening up. So we're still, even though we've known about it for a little bit, that more formal process of having those case management pick lists available and things like that, that really only began June 1st. And part of it too is they are also in the midst of hiring a ton of case managers. So all of the case managers who worked at companies who weren't chosen, many of them are interviewing with other case management companies and will be hired by other case management companies. And so in part, they're also trying to look at their capacity and things like that. So give them a little bit of grace, just because it's only the 11th. It's only been 11 days. So give them a little bit of time, because right now they're flooded with calls. So I know it's a little frustrating because you want to get it all done. Totally understand that. But I'm going to ask for on their behalf to be a little patient and to give them a little grace to be able to do that. We've got somebody going back to the family and caregiver training. People will call that FCAR for short. FCAR needs to be updated somehow to not have to be tied to another service, meaning I'm trying to change providers, but I have to find one that also offers FCAR. And I'm finding that even if they are listed on the choice or pick list, they often are saying that they aren't offering FCAR. That is incredibly frustrating. And a big part of that is because it is a service that not very many people know about, and not very many people use. And part of the problem is they did actually make some changes because let me back up and explain for those of you who have no idea what we're talking about. On the Family Supports Waiver and the CIH waiver, there is a service called Family and Caregiver Training. And they're looking at specifically non-paid caregivers. And so this is a way that family members or non-paid caregivers can go to a conference, can go to a training, can work with somebody to help them learn how to meet the needs of their loved one even better. So oftentimes it is used to pay like for a conference fee, or maybe you'll have like a 1-day training session or something like that. And FCAR, or Family and Caregiver Training, is used to pay for that. Now, it cannot pay for travel and it cannot pay for food, but it can pay those registration fees, for example. And originally, you did not have to be a provider of another service to be able to provide FCAR. Now you have to not only provide another service, there are certain services you have to provide in order to provide family and caregiver training. I'm thinking residential services is what's sticking in my head, but I'm also pulling that off the top of my head, so I can't swear that it's accurate. That didn't used to be a requirement, and it is now. And I do recognize that, yeah, that's making it harder to access. And it's an incredibly valuable service, but it's one that most people have never heard of, so they don't use it. And so as a result, I think the providers don't necessarily nurture it because it's not what's paying their bills. And I don't say that to sound as negative as it just did, but just recognizing that um, it gets a lot less attention because it is not a well-used service. Um, one of the things that you can do nowadays, and this is again one of those things that's changed just within the last few years, is as the state has changed their computer systems that they're using, is that a case manager can actually put a note in the state's computer system to say, "Hey, I've got a client who is looking for an FCAR provider, a family and caregiver training provider. Um, if you're available, will you contact them?" They can do that with all sorts of services because, especially when you're talking about services like PAC, which is participant assistance and care, or like residential services. I think here in Marion County, the pick list is 48 pages long. I know I am not going to call that many companies. Holy cow, that is craziness. And especially when we've got a lot of those companies who have waiting lists because they're full, having your case manager be able to put a note in the system to say, "Hey, I've got a client who is looking for providers of this service. If you are available, will you reach out to my client?" Can be incredibly helpful and incredibly valuable because it helps weed out people who are already full. So that's something that I would talk to your case manager about, is to see if they can help you that way. Case managers aren't allowed to recommend one company or another over another. They're not allowed to do that. And I know that a lot of people get frustrated with that too because they're like, "Why won't they help me?" They're specifically prevented from saying, "Hey, I really like company X." Um, but that's one way that they can help. So that's one of the things I would recommend. Um, what can we do to ensure that VR is funding accommodations like communication, regulation, scribe, etc., that are required for a person to attend college or participate in a job? I was recently denied access to my chosen mode of communication through VR after VR had paid for it for several semesters, and I was highly successful in college. This quick and unexpected decision has derailed my education and my mental health and has put me at risk of losing my highly trained communication regulation partner. They are specially skilled and must develop a sense of trust for my nervous system to maintain regulation in class or in the community. Um, will the ARC help me appeal the decision? Give us a call, first of all. But this is absolutely one of the things I would absolutely appeal. Now, the reality is VR, like every other government service, has been getting funding cuts. A lot of VR's funding comes directly from the federal government. The feds have cut the money that they are giving to states, and then the state also, cut about 10% from all government agency budgets. So we are facing funding cuts, and as a result, I know that VR is pulling back. Plus, for the last several years, we actually had a lot of additional COVID funding that was being used at VR. Let me rephrase that. It was money that was designed for VR that was part of the COVID boost that government agencies were getting. That money has now run out, and so now they're also pulling back on some of the supports and services that way too. So we are seeing some of those things, but absolutely, that is one of the things you should absolutely appeal. And that's one of the things I want people to know is you can appeal. If your services get cut, you have the right to appeal. And in this particular case, one of the things I would absolutely be documenting is how important this service was, how effective this service was, and now as a result of this funding cut, the consequences of those cuts. So yeah, give us a call. Let's talk about it more, and let's work on that appeal. Um, I attended the first virtual meet and greet, but there were some technical issues. I went to join the virtual meet and greet on June 23rd. Would that be okay? Oh, absolutely. You can go to every single one of them if you want to. Because the reality is, because it's a meet and greet and it's not highly scripted and things like that, you're going to learn different things. You're going to see some different people, and so you're going to get a different feel. And sometimes it takes more than once of meeting somebody to get kind of an idea of who they are and what their company is really going to be like. So you can absolutely go to all of the meet and greets if you'd like to, whether they're in person or virtual. Um, if you have other questions, please go ahead and share. I've got somebody saying, thank you for sharing all of these options because I had no clue that all of these materials existed. I didn't know all these services were out there. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this webinar, was to make sure people knew what resources were out there, not just those waiver services. And it's funny, I showed one of my colleagues the slide of all of the services available under each of the four waivers. Her jaw dropped. Well, I can't tell you exactly what she said, but she was shocked because even she didn't realize there were that many services available on each of those waivers. But it's also beyond just waivers. And, the reality is, especially if you've got a family support waiver, you've got a very small waiver budget. It's $26,482 a year. And that absolutely provides supports. But it's not necessarily a lot of supports. And so sometimes we also need to make sure that we are utilizing services and supports from other areas, whether it's Medicaid, whether it's other government programs like voc rehab, like MRO services, or whether it's community-based supports, so that we can make sure we stretch our waiver dollars further, so that we are making sure our loved ones get the supports and the services they need to live their lives, and not just live a basic life, but to live an enjoyable life, to live a meaningful life. But that we are doing so in a way that we are stretching those dollars, we are maximizing those services, so that we are getting the best bang for our buck. Um, Hold on, I'm seeing one other. Um, Sorry, somebody asked, what is MRO services? Thank you for calling me out. Okay, because that's just it. We get in the habit of speaking in alphabet soup and we forget. So MRO is Medicaid rehabilitation option. So those mental health services that are available through community mental health centers. Thank you for asking that. My friend Kathy Riley would be so disappointed in me for doing that. Um, Kathy is an incredibly strong advocate, and she did a lot of work with the Division of Mental Health and Addiction as her son was growing up, and she was not fazed to just yell out in the middle of a meeting, "Wait a second, I'm a parent. I don't know what that term means. What are you talking about?" And it got to the point that she did this for so long, and she did this with such effectiveness because the professionals in the room realized, oh yeah, we need to do better about that. She actually changed the entire culture at the Division of Mental Health and Addiction, so that they really went out of their way to never use an acronym in a meeting or anything like that, to make sure that everybody actually knew what was going on. Oh, we've got a few other things that have come in. How can someone access MRO services? Are individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities qualify, and who can provide the services? So you can start by contacting your local community mental health center. Then there are also some community mental health centers who have programs specifically designed for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Off the top of my head, the ones that I can think of Our Eskenazi in Marion County has something called the STARS program, which are mental health services specifically designed for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities or people with dementia. The Bowen Center up in the Fort Wayne area has an entire autism program because that's how it started. It is open to people with all sorts of intellectual and developmental disabilities. Um, uh, Meridian Health Services has the Connections program. And in fact, the Connections program is the only program in the state of Indiana that is certified by the National Association on Dual Diagnosis. And Meridian Health Services has programming um, in multiple counties throughout the state. So, pulling this off the top of my head, I think it's pretty much like central Indiana, kind of the Shelbyville-ish area and north. That's at least what's in my head. But if you go to Meridian Health Services website and you look at the Connections program, and that's CONNXXIONS, you can see where all they have services. And so you start there by contacting your local community mental health center, or if you've got one of those programs that do have specialty programs for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, give them a call and say, hey, I've got a loved one. They have autism or they have an intellectual disability and they have mental health needs. Or actually, maybe it would be better to start with, I have a loved one who has anxiety and depression, or I have a loved one who has schizoaffective disorder and they have autism. We'd like to be able to get involved with MRO services. Do you have openings? And start that way. That's how you do that. And it's typically the community mental health center who is providing the different services. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I hope this was helpful. And as always, if you ever have questions, give us a call here at the Arc of Indiana. Talk with one of our family advocates. Every single one of us is either a parent, a self-advocate, or a sibling. So we all live this life too. If you are anything like me, you're going to think of something 3 weeks from now. Give us a call, send us an email. Either way, we would love to help. We'd love to be able to talk to about your specific situation so that we can answer your questions and help you get the support you need. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Have a wonderful evening.